Good afternoon. Welcome to the panel Mobilizing the Immune System in the Battle Against Cancer. My name is Louise Perkins. I'm the Chief Science Officer of the Melanoma Research Alliance, or MRA, and MRA is pleased to be able to host this panel today. A quick word about MRA. We are a unique nonprofit founded in 2007 under the auspices of the Milken Institute by Deborah and Leon Black. And I'm delighted that our founder, Deborah Black, is here today, along with several of our board members in the audience. As the largest private nonprofit funder of melanoma research in the world, MRA is dedicated to funding new research to treat this disease. And melanoma is a frightening disease whose incidence is on the rise. It kills one person every hour in the US, tens of thousands around the globe, and incidence is on the rise, particularly in young people. Much of our funded research is geared toward the development of new treatments for late-stage disease because the prognosis for those folks with late-stage disease is particularly poor, less than a year for most people. But this panel isn't just about melanoma. If you look at global statistics for cancer around the globe, it's estimated by the year 2030, 13.2 million people will succumb to cancer. So clearly there is a continued need for the development of new treatments beyond the current approaches. What we're here to talk about today is one of the most exciting approaches in the development of new cancer therapeutics in recent times, and that is cancer immunotherapy, or mobilizing the body's immune system in the fight against cancer. This is not a new idea. It's something that's been explored for decades and has been implemented with limited success. But I must say that melanoma is one of the unique diseases which actually has stood as a prototype for the ability to harness the body's immune system in the fight against cancer. There is a lot of progress that is taking place today in melanoma, lung cancer, and other diseases. And what is that progress brings us to the topic of our panel today. We'll cover a variety of questions, including what is immunotherapy and why it's so intellectually appealing as well as scientifically appealing. How is it that new approaches to engaging the immune system in the fight against cancer are working now and weren't working as well before? What are the barriers that biotech and pharmaceutical companies face in bringing forward new treatments of this nature? And how are nonprofits, patients, academics, pharma, and government working together to advance this cause? So we have a terrific panel assembled here for you today to provide answers to some of these questions, and I'm going to give them extremely brief introductions because you have their full bios in your package. On my left is Arie Belldegrun, who is founder and executive chairman of Kite Pharma and a UCLA professor. Michael Giordano, also on my left, is senior vice president and head of development at Bristol Myers Squibb. Suzanne Topalian is professor of surgery and oncology at Johns Hopkins University and director of the melanoma program at the Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center in Baltimore. Suzanne also served as chief science officer for MRA from 2009 to 2013 until recently, and is now the head of our scientific advisory panel. And finally, on my right, Jeff Rowbottom is managing director at KKR in New York and head of KKR Capital Markets. Jeff is also a board member of MRA and a melanoma survivor. So with that as introduction, I'm actually going to turn to Jeff to get us started today. Jeff, given your perspective as a businessman and as a melanoma survivor, why is it that mobilizing the body's immune system in the fight against cancer is so appealing?
So as a survivor of melanoma, I guess when I thought about cancer historically and I was giving money to different cancer organizations and certainly as family members were touched, I knew the statistics that 1 out of 2 men would have cancer. I knew 1 out of 3 women will have cancer at some point. But you always think it's going to be way down the road and at some point I'll have cancer. But at age 39, I got that call that you really don't want to get. I knew nothing about melanoma. I really thought skin cancer was scrape it off, not that big a deal. I learned very quickly that melanoma is a form of skin cancer, and with no family history or anything, I quickly started to get up to speed. And it was something that I really, quite frankly, didn't want to learn a lot about. So I think when we talk about immunotherapy, the cancer is very personal in a lot of different ways. It's personal to people who devote their careers to trying to come up with cures, people who are working in business to work with a variety of government and charitable organizations and scientists to come up with treatments and apply them in a commercial way. And But I think the thing about immunotherapy, which is really exciting if you're a patient, and someday a lot of us will, or our family will be, is I didn't really fully understand how cancer is treated. I knew about chemo, I knew people's hair fall out, I knew all these kind of things, but when you actually go there and you go to Sloan Kettering, you start to see it, you start to learn about the different ways. And the way that I learned that the most effective tool against fighting cancer is actually our own immune system. And I found that pretty interesting. The chemo and radiation, all those things that we all hear about, I didn't know much about, is trying to kill the cancer cells while not killing your normal cells. What's really exciting now that I've learned about it is immunotherapy is treating your body, treating your immune system, and equipping it to go fight the cancer. And that's such a more, intuitively as a non-scientist, as a business person, seems to make a lot of sense given how tricky cancer is. So, now when I'm wearing a lot of different hats is that I'm, a cancer survivor, I'm a business person, I'm a board member of the MRA, which is part of the whole Milken Institute, and I'm a donor, so I'm thinking about it from a lot of different perspectives, including the fact there's people who are now have their loved one who learn about immunotherapy, and there's drugs that are FDA approved, there's ones that are in clinical trials, and the theoretical immunotherapy is good, it's exciting, it is a different question if it's you or your loved one and there's a drug that's in a clinical trial and then you're trying to get it. So that's something that I think this group and that the Milken Institute brings together is part of our challenge here is to attack that problem, is that we've made tremendous progress. I think the war on cancer, there's been up and downs, there's hype, but I think this newer way to treat cancer is unbelievably exciting from all those perspectives. So why don't I pause there?
That's great. I mean, you really put a point on it for an audience that isn't necessarily full of scientists of the type that sometimes we're used to dealing with. It really does sound like we're poised for real breakthroughs. Suzanne, can you tell us a little bit about why now and what's changed?
I think what's changed is that the science has actually caught up with the ideas that we have had for the past few decades. I've been in the field of immunotherapy for a very long time, and we have always had ideas about how to activate the immune system, as Jeff mentioned, to fight cancer and other diseases. But we needed the science to catch up in terms of genetic technology, ways to grow immune cells in the laboratory, which Ari can speak more to. And now we are actually there. We're at a convergence of technology and ideas, which is allowing us to take this to the next level.
That's great. And so, Ari, tell us from your perspective, Suzanne mentioned the ability to grow cells in the lab is one of the things. Why is that part of engaging the immune system to fight cancer?
Since science drives technology and drug development, I thought of just putting one slide to show you what are the scientists doing in the labs and how much are they publishing. So you'll see the feedback, maybe slide number 1. You'll see the feedback that you will get from what's happening today in the laboratories. Here you have the number of publications on the public domain in the PubMed, and on the bottom you have 4 decades of research. In blue is chemotherapy. It's the workhorse of oncology. And you can see that towards the mid-80s it peaked and then started coming down. It's still there. Chemotherapy is still there, but it's not the future. On the right, in red and towards the right, you can see the number of publications that are now in the public domain with T-cell immunotherapy. So the excitement is there globally, and you should remember that whatever publication you see here, it will take 5 to 7 years to see it either in clinical trials or approved by the FDA. But still, that excitement will eventually extrapolate to all these new ideas. Now, why is that happening? because I'll divide it to three. I've been in that business, I think, exactly like we started together at the National Cancer Institute, and there have been three phases. When I did my doctorate degree at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel, we knew that the immunotherapy, the immune system has three types of cells. We have killer cells that are doing the job, helper cells that help, and suppressors that need to suppress. That's about. We didn't know much. And when I'm looking fast forward, when I came as a fellow to the National Cancer Institute, looking, so what do we need now after I immersed myself about 5 or 6 years in residency surgery, the science was completely different. We now understood all the antennas that the cell have, the GPS that is using, the engines, the sensors. We suddenly realized how is that happening. And the last group is very simple. Once you understand it, how your engine is working, taking in a piece, putting it out, it becomes really straightforward. And I think we are now in these exciting times that we can do anything that one would ask us to do, because by the same time, as Suzanne said, genetic engineering has become simple and quite routine. Tell us what to do, we'll remove or insert, and that's why you engineer the cells.
Fascinating.
Michael,
It's great. It's great listening to my four co-panelists, because what I do, which is to develop drugs and bring them really from the needs of the patient through the scientific inquiry, through the regulatory process, and then the commercialization. And everything that's been said so far, and everything that you folks do and we all do on our daily basis, is part of what I try and do in my job, developing innovative medicines. One, we keep the patient at the center of what we need. Two, we need to follow the science, because if you follow the science, science will be good business. Good business is not necessarily good science. And Yervoy, which is the first immuno-oncology agent that's been approved, mostly approved, in recent times, the past 10 years, to treat melanoma, represents a constellation of everything that the folks on this panel are here to talk about. One, unmet medical need for patients. Two, following the science. Three, biotech. Yervoy came from BMS's purchase of an innovative biotech company called Medarex. And so I think you really need, across the continuum of all those of us who are represented here today and others, government included, not here yet, or maybe they are some in the audience, in order to bring innovative medicines to patients. So I think, in my mind, a lot of what we're talking about here today is the horizontal integration of everything that is necessary from discovery through commercialization. And I think all of us, and I left you out, but I left you out for last, which is the role of nonprofit organizations to really be the honest broker and push all of us into the right direction to make sure that we're always keeping the patient's interest at the center of what we do. And every one of our contributions can be maximally leveraged. So thanks to MRA.
Thank you. So Suzanne, you were involved with MRA for quite a while, and can you speak to that whole subject of how nonprofits play a role in the drug development business, especially as it relates to immune therapy?
Mm-hmm. Nonprofits are playing an increasingly important role in driving the science forward that's going to bring new drugs into the clinic to help patients. You've all heard about sequestration. This is affecting the National Institutes of Health funding as much as it affects anything else in our lives. And as other funding sources are shrinking now, foundations such as MRA and other disease-based foundations become increasingly important. Philanthropy becomes increasingly important to help drive the science forward. Foundations and philanthropy fill a very important funding gap, which is supporting cutting-edge ideas which are a little bit risky, perhaps too risky for standard organizations to put their dollars behind. But I think that taking an educated, calculated risk can be a very good thing. And certainly in my years at MRA, that is what we did. And I think we were successful at selecting projects which have now made it into the clinic and helped to understand how drugs like Yervoy, which Michael mentioned, and other drugs like Zelboraf, which was recently approved for melanoma, to help understand how these drugs work. Without understanding how they work, we can't take it to the next level to increase the response rates. We want to see 100% responses, not 50% or 40%. And so it's going to take quite a bit more research before we can get to that point. But the recent developments, I think, have been extremely encouraging.
And Ari, go ahead, please.
I just want to take it even one step further, because kind of there are two types of research. There is the directed research that are being carried out in the pharmaceutical world and in the biotechnology. But then and those are limited by budget, small companies, small research, but it's very directed to answer a specific question. Doesn't necessarily say that we will not find great discoveries there, and probably we are. But at the same time, the field would not move just on that directed research. You need the non-directed research that comes from philanthropic, from government, that really is science for the sake of science and moving, truly moving the field forward. And when I see where and what are the changes, without us at Kite Pharma trying to join the National Cancer Institute and all their new technologies, it wouldn't have had the impact that we can do it right now.
And can you speak also, Ari, from your standpoint as an entrepreneur who's been involved in a couple of different biotech companies, and what's changed in the world over time?
Opportunities existed always, and I think they will always exist. But big pharmas or small pharmas are becoming big pharmas by merging. And by that, a lot of the drugs that each of the companies have sometimes don't find a home at the right home, and here are the opportunities. I was involved in a company called Kruger Biotechnology that very smart companies rejected it for many years, and after 9 years, we stumbled on that molecule at the UK, and we said, that's very interesting. Yeah, but this was returned by several big pharma. I said, this is the opportunity. Today, it's called Zytiga or abiraterone, which has a sales of about $2 billion a year by Johnson & Johnson. So I don't think that things have changed. Yes, the science is better, but opportunities will come, and you just need to understand the science to take the risks.
And Michael, in your role, tell us a little bit about the opportunity around Yervoy. Can you maybe give us a little bit of how it works, but also what was so appealing about Yervoy?
Well, I'll say a few things, which is immunotherapy and Yervoy represent a very innovative way to treat cancer. Immunotherapies have been around for a while, but they've had a renaissance since some of the deeper understanding of the immune system. When you're dealing with a highly innovative medicine, which is a new paradigm really for treating cancer, you're dealing with innovation that you somehow need to put, and I hate to use the term, into a box, because regulatory authorities and in some regards clinicians and in some instances patients need to have a simplified understanding. And when you are dealing with something that's innovative, there's likely to be new observations. So for Yervoy, for example, there were new ways in which tumors would respond. They didn't respond immediately. Some tumors responded in a delayed fashion. There's an entire new constellation of potential side effects, including colitis and other immune-related side effects, which again, getting people used to. Regulatory authorities, our investigators, and Suzanne and others can comment on this. Access providers, so insurance providers do not necessarily, and they still don't necessarily understand how some of the immunotherapies may work. So the innovator's dilemma sometimes is spending the time to make sure that individuals can then understand that which you're trying to accomplish. And this is just the beginning of a really exciting innovation. There'll be much more with regard to having to understand how innovations need to be translated into benefit.
Now Yervoy and new drugs that are coming along are sort of things that you can put in a bottle and sell, if you will.
Yes?
Things that
Or in a box.
Or a box.
And a tablet maybe one day.
And things that Ari's was talking about, cell-based therapies, engineered cells. That sounds a little bit different. Is it really? Would one of you comment on that?
I'll comment about Yervoy. Yervoy is a CTLA-4 blocker, which cancers, as part of their ability to escape, as part of their ability to grow, can escape the body's normal immune system. And one of the checkpoints that is involved in a cancer's ability to stop the immune system from destroying it is called CTLA-4. And so a discovery was made many years ago by very bright basic scientists and then translated into antibodies in a biopharma company, and then further developed in a collaboration between academics, government, and big pharma to bring Yervoy, which is a CTLA checkpoint blocker, which essentially unleashes the body's immune system to fight cancer, in this instance melanoma, but we need to, I think, broaden our discussion beyond melanoma to essentially all types of cancer. So that, I think, is the way Yervoy works. It's not personalized in the sense that it's specific to any individual's immune system. And that may differ somewhat from what Ari may speak to us about.
Yeah, please.
You know, whether you give a pill or you do a complicated procedure that eventually gets to the patient, we should remember that the excitement of immunotherapy is because this is the only treatment that can result in durable, complete remission and cures. And if we do it right, one infusion, one treatment that directly hit the target takes away all the cancer in the body till the last cancer cell. And being for 20 years at UCLA, and I have here Dr. Jim Economou, who is the Vice Chancellor for Research at UCLA, and we started actually a program in immunotherapy early on when we were young assistant professors, and we said that is the way to go with a lot of frustration, no funding, but we persevered, and now suddenly we can deliver. Suddenly you see complete disappearance and cure. That was drive. So whether you give it in a bottle or you give it with a pill, for patients, that's the cure. We have patients who are now 5-10 years with absolutely no evidence of disease. And
It's
that's
very
why,
exciting.
Yeah.
It's really a major change.
I'd like to just toss out the idea that immune-based therapies are actually personalized therapies, and it's not personalized in the way that the public normally thinks of it. And we've all heard about personalized therapies based on mutations in individual patients' tumors, but the immune system is actually, at least theoretically, capable of targeting those changes in the DNA that every patient's tumor has. Many of them are unique. An individual's tumor can contain hundreds of these mutations. So in one sense, the immune system is a common denominator because it's one treatment that can be applied to many individuals. But within each individual, I do see it as a personalized therapy which can target these changes in the tumor. And the other thing about immunotherapy is that it is a living therapy that persists potentially indefinitely and can keep pace with new changes that may happen in the DNA of the tumor. So I think immune-based therapies are unlike any other kind of cancer therapy from that perspective.
yeah.
Jeff, you're in touch with a number of patients. Do you hear stories kind of on the ground from folks who have been treated?
Yeah, there's a couple things also. Is I think a lot of your voice stories and the ones that are coming up, the anti-PD-1, and as a business person, I think if Bristol Myers has been cited by Abby Joseph Cohen in the Barron's Roundtable, and even this weekend, Barron's had the golden age of R&D for drug companies. So it's not lost on the business community that this could be a very, very big business. Right now, I think, and I'm not the expert on this, that a lot of them are being used to treat people with evidence of disease, and there's tumors to see and see them shrink. But I think as we move this forward, drugs like Yervoy and others being used for people who are high risk, and there's a lot of people with high risk that you might be able to use some of these preventatively. And if you're someone who's in the ultra high risk category, I am, that's extremely exciting to try and do. They can't prove right now that that works, I don't think yet, but to me, as things evolve, and as a layperson, what it seems like to me, we're in the early innings, and they're not always sure right now whether Yervoy or this anti-PD-1, why it works on certain people and not others. And then also my understanding from meeting some patients who, as an example, are in clinical trials where they're taking the Yervoy, which is FDA approved, the anti-PD-1, which is in clinical trials, and now they've taken it to the next step saying there's synergies between the two immunotherapies and trying them together. And as a result of one of the events that we did for MRA, one of our sponsors brought up a very late stage 4 patient who'd been on a lot of the older treatments, had given up, came up to Sloan Kettering and took a combination of the PD-1 and the Yervoy, and this is someone with severe brain metastases and riddled with tumors, and after 5 months was going skiing in Colorado. So we've seen amazing, I personally have met people with unbelievable stories that is very exciting if you see these things happening. But it seems like there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of resources that we all need to put together to make these even more effective, and I don't think we understand yet all the reasons why it works in some patients and not others.
Well, you touched on a really important subject. We have new tools in the toolbox. Yervoy is approved. A number of anti-PD-1 active drugs are coming along. And then we also have these existing tools, the sort of traditional chemotherapeutics, and some newer ones, so-called signal transduction inhibitors that are in the toolkit. There are a lot of possible combinations of those. Suzanne, are the immune therapies going to be used solo? Are they standalone? Might they be used in combination with other things? How will we sort all of that out?
So for some patients, immune therapy is all that's needed. And for others, it's going to take more than that. There are an almost limitless number of potential combinations with other existing drugs of all kinds. So Jeff mentioned combining more than one immune-based therapy together, but it could be immunotherapy plus chemotherapy plus a targeted therapy plus T-cell therapy. And how do you choose from among all these possibilities? This is where basic research comes in. This can be research in academic labs, in biotech labs, in pharma labs, but this is where basic research comes in because we need laboratory models, honestly, to help sort out what should be the priority of bringing these possible combinations into the clinic, into clinical trials.
And Ari, from your perspective, from the cell therapeutics perspective, how does that fit in? Are combinations going to be used?
Maybe I can show the next slide number 2. I want to show you while I believe that in the next maybe 3 to 5 years, Michael and his group will dominate the field of cancer really in a way that we have not seen it before, and it's one of the greatest discoveries in the last decade. But I think in the future, what you see here is the way I envision, personally, I and a lot of people in our field, of how people will be treated in a super personalized treatment. And what you can see here, in a very simple way, this is the patient with cancer. You take out his cells, so it's his own cells, and then you isolate the T cells, which are the aggressive killer cells. Now, these cells have failed because they have something in them. Either they are old, they are not recognizing well the cancer, they have a defect. But today, we understand what exactly is missing. So we take the gene, we put it into a virus that infects the cell, and suddenly this engine has about 5 or 10 more cylinders, and it starts flying, and it seeks cancer cells and will destroy. So you give the patient its own cells, infuse it with some other, so far we don't know this, work in progress, but we give these cells and we reinfuse it. And what's happening, as opposed to the treatment that Michael has shown now, you give the drug and it's washing out from the circulation. That drug that we have given now, the patient's young cells, are being incorporated into the immune system, and now you have young cells in our body, if you want. You know, these are completely engineered cells, and therefore, whatever you want to engineer, you can engineer. And today, we understand it's not perfect, and what's not perfect now is suddenly you have a super engine in a car that the brakes are not designed to control this car, and therefore you have still toxicity because you are flying with this car and it gets there, it kills all cancer cells, but there are some side effects. So we need to perfect the brakes, and some of the brakes that in combination with the brakes that now are in development at a company and other companies, I think this combination will be the ultimate personalized immunotherapy for cancer patients.
So this is a different flavor of personalization than running out and getting your genome sequenced,
Oh, absolutely.
right? Yeah, this is...
Yes and no, because you need to know in the future, you will sequence the cancer and you will know what is specifically on your cancer, so I can engineer your cells against your particular cancer.
Make sure I don't lose your number.
It's being done today, and I can show you just one slide, one more slide, and the last one I will, because this is a slide from Dr. Steve Rosenberg, who is the head of the National Cancer Institute, who trained Suzanne and trained me.
I have a slide that looks like that too. Is that my slide or is that Suzanne's slide?
Every slide of mine, it looks like that. Yours 1 in 10. But just to show, these are lungs, and here is a cancer. This is another cancer. This is billions of cells of cancer. One treatment, a single treatment, in a cancer that's called a type of sarcoma, which typically is immune resistant. But these cells were engineered in a way that it cleared completely. So this is 14 months later. This patient has no evidence of cancer. You can see the big mass here is now the tiny here. This one completely disappeared. This one disappeared, and the patient has no cancer. It's one single injection of very few cells that start proliferating in the body, and the factory is in your body because the immune system is smarter than anything that we have identified so far. So that's why I remain optimistic about pushing with this technology.
And the reason I'm excited is because this is not going to be one solution. It's going to be solutions that require multiple modalities within immunotherapy or immunotherapy plus, as Suzanne indicated, targeted agents or perhaps cytotoxics. I'm not a big cytotoxic fan. But it's going to take many of us working across many disciplines. And it's not going to only be about Ares cell-infused therapy or Bristol-Myers Squibb 7 or 8 immuno-oncology agents or the other pharmaceutical companies' wonderful agents. It's going to be a collaboration. And I believe 5 years from now is going to be a very different arena in which we'll be up here equally complex, but talking about how do we mix and match and how do we optimize the therapies. And as Suzanne indicated, without understanding the basic biology and the translational research, rational drug development is not going to be possible. And so I, in my organization, depend a great deal on translational work in order to guide us in the right experiments.
You want to talk a little bit about rational drug development some more? What is it we need to know that we don't know today?
I think we...
How much time do
Yeah.
you have?
Exactly. I think it's a major advance that we can agree, that most people agree now, that we do need some rational basis for selection of combinations, because there was this tendency to test combinations of convenience, where if a particular drug company had 2 drugs, well, let's try combining them and see what happens. I think now, the move is more to rely on science, and if the same drug company does not have those 2 drugs, then drug companies collaborate. Now, here's where we get into another issue, though, about the regulatory agencies, and there are difficulties and some hurdles
Where's
that need
Peggy
to be
Hamburg?
overcome.
Peggy?
Yeah, really. So we can maybe talk about that a little bit, but and again, foundations play a role here in terms of advocacy. Scientists play a role, and clinicians in terms of educating the regulators and how best to proceed. Places where new models are needed, where we have to discard some of the old models. For instance, models for drug testing, the gold standard, the phase 3 trial, where one group of patients gets a placebo and another group gets a experimental drug. Well, I mean, that is really that's going to be passé. I do believe we need to move towards a
That's
new
pretty
model.
revolutionary.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Mike, would you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I will agree that in cancer therapy, I do hope and I do believe that necessarily having to wait for the long trial to demonstrate overall survival, hopefully, will come to an end soon when we have better surrogates. So I do think robust response rates that are durable, that we can, at least in a couple of experiments, link to overall survival benefits, may become an exciting surrogate that we've had in other diseases, antiviral drugs, diabetes. We have surrogates that have been validated, short-term results implying long-term value. Hopefully we'll have more of those in cancer, and then we can speed up rational drug development. So I think it's going to take a little bit of convincing and a little bit of risk-taking on the parts of all of us and regulators to see where we land.
I mean, I think we have an important opportunity with Jeff here to talk about what the customer wants.
Yes.
Does the customer want to participate in a trial where placebo is an offering?
Certainly not. I was even just going to say, I think there's, and I can't speak to all different kinds of cancer. My understanding, though, is that a lot of these therapies are relatively novel, and depending on where you go, your oncologist may not be as specialized to know what the absolute cutting-edge treatment options are. I think as a patient, although it's scary to hear about colitis and things like that, it's far more manageable than the other things that you could be facing. So I think part of it is getting the patients educated enough and aware of what the options are, and having enough slots, quite frankly, to get the patients on the non-placebo drug. But I think the immunotherapies, yes, and I don't want to minimize that there are significant risks in some of them, but often once they learn how to control them, it's pretty manageable in terms of the types of toxicities, and again, not to minimize them. But I think patients, they want access to them, and I think once you see things like the anti-PD-1, which seems very promising in the clinical trials with very minimal toxicities, that begs a lot of different questions on with the drug companies, with the FDA, and with how do you get more trials, because these are people, by the time they're getting to some of these treatments, their window, they're kind of in the 1 year or less window without a lot of other options, and it's infrequent that it just goes away. So as a patient, I think the challenge, for all the constituencies is how do you get people onto these, trials, and how do you get the awareness that these exist, I think are some of the things I would point out.
Yeah, I mean, and this is to you, and this is perhaps one of the more difficult conversations, Michael. Expanded access to new drugs, what are the pros and cons of that? And And what do you see that universe changing in the near future?
Yeah, expanded
might need
access.
to speak to it for this audience.
Expanded access or compassionate use or the use of drugs that may be promising outside of a clinical trial is a public health and a policy dilemma in which you're trying to balance the individual versus the societal interests. And everyone needs to contribute to that dialogue because there is no simple answer. The FDA has a point of view. Pharmaceutical companies have a point of view based upon our ethicists who give us advice, our physician advisors who give us advice. So it's always quite difficult. At BMS and most pharmaceutical companies, compassionate use typically follows when there is an established benefit risk and when there's an end here, and when having a compassionate use program won't interfere with the ability to demonstrate the value of the medicine to society. So there have been some, Tony Ribas and others, who have been quite vocal on the side of compassionate use programs can destroy clinical trials because access is available too soon before the value has been demonstrated. By value, I mean medical value, not financial value. So it's always a dilemma. Our approach is, again, to look carefully at the information, to have our senior scientists with ethicists advise us on what's the right time when the benefit and the risk is sufficiently demonstrated so that it is ethical to have an open, compassionate use program. Our approach instead has been to try and have an open clinical trial, if at all possible, at all times. And we've recently dramatically expanded our clinical trial program. And it's my aspiration, I can't promise, that there will be open clinical trials until at least our PD-1 drug is approved.
Mm-hmm. Right, so a structured way for patients to gain access to the drug.
A structured way, yeah.
Right, right.
And that might include the possibility of real-world research, in which it's simply a descriptive study, simple clinical trial, in which the eligibility criteria are less rigorous, but nonetheless is still contributing valuable information to society.
Right, right. I mean, there's a lot to learn from the clinical trial work that's going on, and I think patients, once they're advised, are incredibly generous about participating in these trials. Mm-hmm. They're really heroes. I guess when trials are done to the standard that you expect, Suzanne, are all of the samples collected and analyzed as thoroughly as possible? And maybe you can give us, the audience, some insight into what that might entail.
Mm-hmm. There's more than ever now a push to get specimens from patients who are on these various clinical trials. So that's really important for immune-based therapies, but I think it's generally important for any new therapy. We realize, many of us have been using blood for these kinds of studies just because it's easy to get blood from a patient when they're in clinic, but immune-based therapies in particular actually act at the tumor site, and we can get the most information about mechanism of action and then how to improve the treatment by getting biopsies serially of tumors in the patients who are being treated and banking them. This is a huge amount of work. Patients have to volunteer to do this, and you're right, these are a very brave group of individuals who often sign on to these trials realizing that the treatment might not help them personally, but it could help, the knowledge could help many other people, and it's with that attitude that these individuals sign on. But yes, biobanking is more important than ever now.
It's a major source of insight into the future, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And so, Ari, can you help us on the subject of the therapies that are being advanced in the area of harnessing the immune system? There seems to be some focus in a particular subset of cancers. What's behind that, and how generalizable do you think it will be?
Again, when we were fellows, there were 2 tumors that were early identified as sensitive to immunotherapy. So the immune system can work against these tumors. And that was a myth that was carried about 15 years ago, 15 years at least, and this was melanoma and kidney cancer. Yes, there are some good evidence that may be a little bit more sensitive to the old type of immunotherapy. But today, when you can genetically engineer and be focused on what is the defect and supplement it, I personally do not see any difference between sarcoma or melanoma or kidney cancer. We used to say years ago that sarcoma is a resistant tumor to immunotherapy. Here, I showed you a guy who is alive and well a year and a half after receiving one treatment, which means that once you understand better the science and you can engineer it, I think that it goes beyond oncology. It will be inflammatory, difficult inflammatory diseases, because the immune, and Michael knows it more than anything else, the same immune system that works so well or supposed to work well against cancer are, in your previous life, you did infectious disease. I can see immunotherapy moving to infectious disease, complicated.
I can too. It was how I got my beginning, immune-based therapies for HIV and leishmaniasis, and turned full circle now.
That's great.
I do agree it's an important point, and Suzanne should talk about this, that we really are expanding the investigation and the success, at least in early days, of using immunotherapy across the spectrum of tumors. We've seen responses in lung cancer, and other agents, PD-1s, other companies have reported responses in colorectal cancer and mesothelioma, and the list is probably getting longer and longer that I'm not familiar with, but I think the age in which we're not limited to renal cell cancer or to melanoma are over with regard to the potential for immunotherapies, as Ari indicated. But Suzanne probably knows the data better than any of us.
Right, right. I mean,
She
so we've been
reported on it in the New England Journal of Medicine last year, which, if you haven't read, it's a sentinel paper, and I believe it will go down as being one of the most important papers of 100 years of medicine. I really do think.
Wow.
Thank you, Michael.
But we need to wait
Right.
100
You heard
years.
it here
So
first.
I'm unlikely to be here, so I can't possibly be wrong.
So this, I think, in the world of immune-based therapy has been a huge breakthrough for us in the past couple of years. For whatever reason, melanoma is best visible to the immune system. And so many of the rules by which we operate now were developed in melanoma research. Kidney cancer is also well recognized, although we understand less about how that works, I think, than melanoma. But in the past couple of years, with these new agents that have been developed by Bristol Myers and other companies that actually release the brakes on the immune system in a very powerful way, we are now realizing that these kinds of therapies can help patients with multiple different kinds of cancers, including lung cancer, colon cancer. I recently saw a report for stomach cancer, and the list may go on and on. We really don't know what the full spectrum is at this point, and we have a lot of work ahead of us now to make these drugs available in clinical trials to patients with these different kinds of cancers to see where this will lead us.
We are at a pivot or tipping point, whichever one you like to say,
Right.
which is why we need to emphasize even more strongly that all of us across the spectrum of whatever we are contributing to this, whether we're in big pharma, biotech, government, philanthropy, academia, or patient advocacy, if we don't work together, I think we'll lose an opportunity to move the tipping point more quickly into really some dramatic changes for the treatment of cancer.
Right.
I'm convinced of that.
Now, I mean, I think one of you said in our preparatory calls that cancer is cured in the press every day, but this sounds like the real deal. I mean, we're
The Post or the Times?
the Times, unfortunately. but this
Not
really
the
does
Washington
sound like the real
Post,
deal.
by the way. The New York Post.
And so what are the barriers? Where are the places that nonprofits and biotech, pharma can really work together? What are the things that we have to overcome? Because the job's not done. As positive as this panel has been, cancer's not going to be cured tomorrow through immunotherapy. Not tomorrow.
As Shakespeare said, first we need to, I don't use the word kill, but get rid of the lawyers.
Well, I think that the problem in small biotech is that given the resources, it's a very focused attention to a specific problem, but it's getting solved and it's getting done. And that focus really needs outstanding technology, needs management, needs funding, and it needs luck. So if you have 3 of the 4, I believe we can do well. But that's where the problem is. And the big pharma, with all due respect, Michael is maybe an exception, but they move slow. I mean, because the organization. Not
We
now.
can move slow. In the old days.
In the old days, okay. So they used to move slow. Not anymore. Okay.
We don't move as quickly as Ari can move.
And Jeff, from your business perspective.
Well, I guess what's been interesting to me is getting involved in the MRA, and one of the things that was a real attraction is I had a notion that the charity, like I wasn't sure how efficiently the capital was being deployed that you were giving, and I think there's a whole set of people needs to come together to attack a very complex problem, and nobody has all the tools. There's scientists, there's commercialization of things, there's business type people, there's scientists, there's all these things that need to come together, and I think the thing that you have to call out is this development of immunotherapy to get patients and so that our loved ones don't die of cancer needs money. Some of it needs to come from the government. That's a challenge right now, as I'm sure everyone is aware of, and I think other panelists address. Then you need to apply money to the right people, and it seems to me this is more specific to melanoma, I've met a lot of the doctors, including Suzanne, who are part of making it happen. And in business, we try and find great management teams to run companies. And so we have a great company here. Immunotherapy is our company. It's a big company. And we need to find the right people. So one of the things with MRA, which is part of the whole Milken model, which I think a lot of people here are probably familiar with, is the collaboration, identifying the great young scientists and getting them money to work on important problems that'll help advance the ball, having established investigators get capital so that they can advance the ball. And my personal experience with the MRA, my oncologist is Dr. Jed Walchuk, and he was working on some clinical trials for Bristol Myers. And what the MRA said is there's some promising things going on. Let's work together with the doctors, with the scientists, with Bristol Myers, and more recently have come together to award a grant. And I think that type of model, as someone who's a donor and a business person, you can see the results. And sometimes in doing research, you need to know when to stop the research in a certain project and redeploy it in a better manner. So I think it's going to take a good institutions, and I quite frankly, seeing the MRA, which Mike Milken's a part of, and it's all, when I started this with talking about individualized, and this is all personalized. I'm in this right now and hopefully making some impact because Deborah Black, who started the MRA, decided that I'm going to do something about this, and they've done a lot, and there's a lot of people that are alive today because of what Deborah and Leon and Mike Milken have done. And so I think I wish that I had not waited till I had cancer to do something about it. So we're at a pivotal moment. They need money, they need people, so to the extent you get involved or try and learn enough to know where you might want to donate money or your time or effort is something that I think we should all think about doing.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge our president and CEO, Wendy Seelig, and she's been instrumental in developing some of the unique partnerships that MRA has undertaken, including academic industry partnerships. Because of the generous gift of our founders, we're able to invest 100% of the other donor dollars raised into the research. And we have entered into, driven by Wendy, a number of these interesting team science programs, some of which don't involve industry, but some of which are academic industry partnerships where there's a leveraging of support on both sides. So this is the kind of unique way that some of the folks involved in a project like this can play a critical role and help to advance the cause. Jeff, I think there's some sort of public health things that I think folks can do, and maybe you can speak to those.
Sure, and I think we may have a slide on this as well. I don't know who's advancing the slides.
Just tell us the number you want,
Select the
Jeff.
number.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Slide 7.
Slide 7. One of the things in talking I had an old friend who's recently joined the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and I met him today here, and one of the senior people there, and I asked them, with blood cancers, you can't really do much to identify it until it happens. One of the things interesting about skin cancer is it's generally pretty easy to see because it usually exhibits itself on the surface of the skin. So I think one of the things is getting very involved in raising money for the science and for advancing that ball, but it's something that at the MRA we want to make sure people understand that check your skin, go to a dermatologist. If you see something that looks a little off, something that changes, please go. And I realize that most people, whether it be business-wise or other, don't seem to have time. They're too busy to do that or to go to their doctor. So please go to your dermatologist. And I can tell you that I've had a number of people, my company is about 900 people, and because of just telling people they need to go, we've had a few people that have been diagnosed with melanoma, and it's a 99.9% cure rate if you find it at stage 0, and it goes down pretty quickly from there. So please go. And along that lines, on slide 8, if we could put up the next slide, one of the leverage finance community, which is very well represented in this conference, we came together last year and threw a big cocktail party in New York City where we had about 600 people, and raising this awareness is a big reason we did it. We raised a lot of money, and we're doing it again in May in melanoma awareness. But one of the companies, iPrio Debt Domain, which specializes in leverage finance, and some of the folks at KKR and other donors put up $250,000. So hopefully everyone will do this. You go to www.debtdomain.com, LFFM, and you just pledge that you've either gotten or will get a skin check, and that will trigger a $100 donation. And we hope to raise $250,000 just from that. This will save your life. It only takes 30 seconds to do that. The important thing is, it is important to click on it, but actually going is what we're really focused on. So thank you.
Important in 2 ways. So there really is incredible momentum here. Last thoughts from the panel as to how we can keep this going.
I think if I'd had one thing that keeps me up at night is to ensure that in the U.S. we will still be innovative, have the resources to remain an innovative scientific and pharmaceutical industry in which we can still bring innovations to patients and not be limited by financial constraints. There's not much better thing to spend the GNP on than, I think, healthcare.
All right.
Well, somebody's been involved, as I said, over 3 decades and seen the change. This is the most exciting time that I have had the opportunity to be involved in that type of research and translating it to patient care. We promised for many years, and that was the problem. We probably promised too early, and therefore the public and Wall Street and whoever, didn't believe that we can deliver. But we have now all the tools to deliver. So we need the cooperation between all the industries to make it happen. I think if now you call a Manhattan Project, it can be done in a very short period of time. But now we need to find a way, the best way to do it.
Well said.
Yeah, one thing that hasn't really been mentioned yet is early information sharing, but I think this is ever more critical with the amount of information that's coming out now from scientific discoveries, and some of this is deposited into public databases, but Michael mentioned lawyers earlier. There are concerns about intellectual property and so forth. I would say that whoever is writing the check to support the research does have some leverage in setting some new rules about accelerated sharing of information. Deborah, again with Melanoma Research Alliance, has set some of those rules. That's one of the mantras of MRA. Maybe that should be more of a focus with other organizations as well.
Right, and I think one of the other concerns is patient privacy and the impacts, potential negative impacts of that. I mean, Jeff, I'm going to give you the last word before we turn it over to questions if we have time. What do patients want?
It's very simple, and it's part of the MRA mission. They want the innovation in a box. They want a treatment that can help them stay alive so they can be with their family, and it really is that simple. And people are very willing to take chances, you know, and endure tough treatments and tough clinical trials and a lot of pain in order to stay around and be with those they love. So I think the urgency and using all the resources of all these different parties, including really the government's a big part of it too, working all together in the collaboration and changing the models to make progress and get results, and having everyone think with that sense of urgency of getting to the results is what we need.
That's great. Well, you did get the last word. We're at the end of the session. I want to thank you all for your attention, and especially thank my panelists here.